Hello, my name's Luke, and welcome to Scapegoat, the podcast where we see who gets the blame and who gets away with murder, sometimes literally. So, in this week's episode, we are going to be discussing the case of Gary McKinnon, the Scottish hacker who was wanted by the United States government for a 10-year period. So, for this episode, we've got two very special guests. From the Not Another Fake Newscast, we've got Paul and Jerry. So, do you want to say hi, guys?
Hi
Hello.
guys.
Yeah. So just before we begin, I'd guess most of the people who listen to Scapegoat will already be aware of your podcast. But do you want to say just a little bit about it, just so the people would know what kind of stuff that you get into?
Jerry, do you want to take this?
Yeah, okay. So we talk about kind of fake news, politics, and real news. We discuss it. We have kind of monthly roundup episodes. We do interviews with different people in politics and the media, and we also kind of do deep dive episodes on specific subjects. So, like we've talked about Carillion and privatisation. We've looked at the war on drugs. We've looked at Trump and Russia and the Skripal poisoning and all kinds of different things. And you can find us on www.notanotherfakenewscast.com.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
you can get us on our Facebook and Twitter at PGMcast.
Well, like you guys, your podcast is actually fairly like presidential because certain things you've reported on have actually become big news stories like weeks after you've done it. Like you're one of the first outlets to be talking about Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, we like to think that we're ahead of the game as much as possible with various stories. Cambridge Analytica and some stuff to do with Saudi oil. We got on quite quickly, and even in the Cambridge Analytica episode, we were, to my knowledge, one of the first sources that stated that young Mr. Grimes was possibly involved with the Brexit campaign, being involved in shady dealings that ended up, as we're now more than aware, has came to fruition, and we're aware that they were funneling money illegally through different processes, such as through the different subsidiary Brexit campaigns.
We also tell stories about dildos sometimes, so weep with the chaff.
I mean, yeah, that's it. It's not all unexciting dour chat about presidents. And do you know that when you put a dildo through like a trash compactor, is that what you would call it, Jerry? Like,
Macerator.
A macerator. One of the things for making strawberries.
Yeah. What happens to that?
No, but nothing happens to it. So it can destroy an engine of a car, but it can't destroy a dildo. Dildos are essentially indestructible. That's what I'm getting at here.
The things that Johnny and Shane from Disaster Artist should really be afraid of is cockroaches with dildos once the apocalypse happens.
I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of afraid of cockroaches with dildos now, and I hadn't even thought about them until you put them together.
Well, hey, that would be a good movie title for John Waters if he wants to move on to it. But yeah, that's something I'd never heard. But yeah,
would you not just call it a dildo roach, replacing the word cock with the word dildo?
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, dildo roach just makes me think of Papa Roach, and the two are pretty much interchangeable as far as I'm concerned.
Aye, the boy that used to sing for Papa Roach was an absolute dildo, so that makes perfect sense.
What was his name again? It was he called himself Kobe Dick.
Well, I arrest my case.
I mean, he definitely is an absolute dick. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
We had the IQ of a slab of Kobe beef.
don't ever. I was trying to make a joke. I was thinking about a joke to do with Kobe beef, but then I thought, I don't really want to bring down Kobe beef. And the thing is, obviously, when we spoke, so we done a environmental issue, and we discussed the fact that people should try and avoid eating beef if they can, because it's just no good for the environment. Like, eat meat. I'm not saying go vegan or anything, but fuck me, man. The production of beef in pretty much all formats is just no done particularly well or ethical for either the environment or the cows or the rainforest or anything. But at the same time,
I think it's a good time to introduce our first sponsor, which is the Japanese Council of Meat. Thanks very much for getting on board and sponsoring Scapegoat. Okay. Gary said, moving on to Gary McKinnon. So we'll just start off and talk a little bit about Gary's early life. So Gary McKinnon was born in Glasgow in 1966. Yeah, were you guys born in Glasgow?
No, but it's
I
close
was
enough.
born just outside of Glasgow. It's like 60 mile along the road. Essentially, he's a local boy to us.
Aye. And his parents were both Glaswegians. There was Janice Sharp, his mother, who was a musician, and Charlie McKinnon, his dad, who was a member of a scaffolding gang. Which
Can I just clarify? Is that a magician or a musician?
she's a musician, but like maybe she did magic tricks in her spare time. You never know.
Cool, yeah, just check.
Yeah. Okay. So the Scot has been described by US prosecutors as being responsible for the greatest military computer hack of all time. So, I think that, as I've written here, sometimes you just notice the fact that he's described as very, very Scottish by the media, which is something that we'll get back to later. But he's normally, if you read an article, it will refer to him as the Scot. But Gary moved at the age of 7 down to London after his parents split up. And he doesn't really speak with the most Scottish accent you've ever heard. He sounds actually quite posh London.
Ah, okay. So you're saying he's Scottish like Andy Murray when he loses?
Yes. Or it's like this podcast. If it's good, I'm British. If it's bad, I am. And if it's in the middle, I'm Northern Irish. So the way it works.
Oh yeah, it's very much like ours. We're the only Scottish podcast that does fake news and politics, unless, of course, we hit on a really good story. Then we're a forward-thinking British podcast. Obviously, That's how it works.
Well, I think that is how it works. That you have to buy in that if you do good things, you can finally proudly be British. But if you're drunk in an airport at 5 in the afternoon, you're certainly Irish or Scottish in that matter. So
I mean that seems reasonable.
I mean, in saying that though, ironically, the British Empire treated the entire world like it was drunk in an airport at 5 o'clock for the best part of 400 years. So,
I say there, Zimbabwe, you seem to be drunk in an airport. We're going to take all your resources. Yeah. So Gary grew up with a strong interest in computers, receiving his first computer, like an Atari computer, at the age of 14, and he was deeply into playing games, looking at this the proto internet he was even on, which might sound strange at the time when phones were plugged, when you got your internet from a phone line. But so he left school at the age of 18 and became qualified to become a hairdresser.
After 10 years of being a hairdresser, Gary's friends managed to convince him to follow his passion and to go into computing as a real job.
It's quite a jump.
It's a logical progression, isn't it, really?
Well, a hairdresser is it does seem very intuitive that you'd become a hairdresser, then get into computers. I mean, isn't that the story of Bill Gates as well?
Bill Gates, what's the other one? The dead one that does Apple?
Steve Jobs.
That's the one.
Once he went bald and he lost his hair, he became so enraged he just couldn't cut another person's hair. And he went to his backup plan of becoming a hairdresser.
The backup plan of leaving hairdressing, surely.
Well, it's one of those things that when you leave hairdressing, you just can't go back. You burn that bridge and you're ostracized by the hairdressing community, which is...
Well, I mean, that's what they say, isn't it? When you leave hairdressing, you can't go back. That's a famous saying, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I've heard that an awful lot about, the hairdresser's code. You don't talk about what you've talked about when you're hairdressing. You don't discuss hair after hours, and if you break that,
It's like Fight Club.
Yeah, it's like Fight Club, but they'll come in and they'll take away all your scissors, and you won't be able to buy any more because they're hard to come across. So, in growing up,
that's not my experience with hairdressers.
you find hairdressers really easy to come across.
I can either confirm or deny these reports. Sorry?
Is that why Paul told you to stop going back to him to get your hair cut? Anyway.
So, growing up, Gary was fascinated by certain conspiracy theories, especially involving stuff like the Disclosure Project. At the age of 15, he joined BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association, and he was absolutely fascinated with them. And when his stepfather came from it's the most UFO sightings in the UK is the town his stepfather grew up in. And when he learned this, he started just really pumping his stepfather for information, saying, "Tell me about the UFOs," and he kept going on about this for days. Gary believed the US government was hiding plans of perpetual energy devices and anti-gravitational devices. So he was pretty focused on thinking, yeah, this is stuff that, the US government is hiding. And Gary began just using the internet to try and find more and more information. So initially, Gary decided to do a test run, and he hacked the computers of Oxford University. He got into their network, and he thought, this is actually relatively easy. So my next target should be US Space Command.
That's again, it's one of those. Like I was just going to say, going by the fact that he went, I'm going to be a hairdresser, now I'm going to work in IT. The logic that I'm going to hack Oxford, I'm going to hack the whole of fucking NASA. I mean, he's certainly a man who likes to. He thinks big, shall we say? He thinks big.
I kind of feel that he really missed a trick. He maybe should have gone to America, become a military barber, cutting soldiers' hair, and tried to get information that way. He could have used his mad barber skills.
Just chatting away to them. Oh, you going on any holidays this year? Are UFOs real? Is there perpetual energy?
I know, like, you going on any holidays this year? Oh, yeah, I am. Is it Venus? No, we don't have a space program. What are you talking about? Oh, no, nothing. Oh, my hand razor's running out. If only I had some kind of 0 point energy for it to run off. Do you know of any? Like, you could fit it into the chat.
Man, Alpha Centauri is so beautiful in spring, I've heard. Have you ever been?
You must go. Interestingly enough, I like he seems to have got a lot of his information and been quite into the Disclosure Project.
Yeah, the Disclosure Project was really getting big around the time that he started doing his hacking. So this is about 2000 to 2001, 2002. So this is peak Disclosure Project.
All right, so he was a friend of Greer, who is obviously king of the Disclosure Project, isn't he?
Well, I don't think he knew. I think he was involved.
Yeah, Stephen Greer. By a friend of Greer, I don't actually mean a friend of Greer. What I essentially mean is a disciple or at least a fan of Greer.
Okay. I wondered if that was kind of a euphemism, gay people in the 70s were friends of Dorothy's.
Well, see, or friend of Elton.
Yeah, they tap them on his shoulder and say, "I'm a friend of Greer." And they say, "Hey, now we can talk our information wherever we want."
I think if you say a friend of Greer, it just means you're gullible. It's a euphemism for gullibility.
Gullible is a motherfucker. It's an alien. It's not an alien. It's an alien. Have you got any proof? None. That's dead not an alien. How can you prove it's an alien? I said it's an alien. To be honest, Greer, this is rough. It's rough. You want to come into the desert? We'll show you some aliens. Don't tell any cunt. No, pay me up front. That seems fucking shifty. Anyway.
Sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Sign a non-disclosure agreement. What, for your Disclosure Project? Shut it. Stop asking fucking questions and sign it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Gary managed to hack about 5,000 computers, although McKinnon claims he actually only hacked 97. And they belong to just different branches of the US, of the US forces, including the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, NASA. And he began looking for military involvement and government cover-ups and new technologies. He was generally looking. He came across different things that he was looking for at the time. For instance, he found non-terrestrial travelers as one of the categories, and he became very fascinated by that. But it didn't lead to that much information, he says.
So see a non-terrestrial. Just curiously, see a non-terrestrial traveller, like an actual. And this is all this isn't actually me throwing in a wee joke or anything. Would this I was going to say spaceman, but I don't just mean would an astronaut essentially fall under being a non-terrestrial traveller if they were as in does terrestrial? I mean, I almost going to say I feel like an idiot for asking this question, but essentially the question I'm asking is: would terrestrial define you as being from Earth or traveling on Earth? Do you know what I mean?
I just think it means you're traveling off Earth. I mean, technically, if you're taking like terrestrial to be like terra, as in like terra firma, if you're getting an aeroplane, you're a non-terrestrial traveler because you're not traveling by land.
Well, see, that's what I'm thinking. If you think of somewhere like NASA that is very scientific in their terminology, technically any astronaut would be a non-terrestrial traveller. They would be something, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I was kind of thinking that non-terrestrial traveller could just be like a terminology for, I don't know, like a shooting star or an asteroid or a comet or something which travels not on a kind of fixed orbit around a planet or whatever, but travels throughout the solar system or the galaxy or whatever. Like, you know, we're talking about NASA here, so it could just be a category for a celestial body. I don't know if it is or not.
Arguably a satellite as well, by the same grounds as what you're saying there, Jerry. Like, if their satellites could fundamentally be non-terrestrial travellers, they are travelling. They are, like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the famous one that fucked off out of our solar system recently? Oh my god,
Voyager.
No, Voyager. Yeah, Voyager. I sound like such a muppet, man. But when Voyager, fundamentally, that would be a non-terrestrial traveller, wouldn't it? I mean, it's travelling through. I mean, I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying that there's a lot of things that could easily fall under that definition, without that they're just using actual scientific definition for, rather than it being something like an alien.
However, I haven't looked at Google specifically for the term non-terrestrial traveller. The only time that I can see it mentioned is in relation to Gary McKinnon.
It also sounds like a Radiohead album, just so we're clear.
It does sound like the sequel to the B-sides of OK Computer, but the problem I find with Gary McKinnon is whenever he's discussing this, he says, like, oh, and what was in the folder? And he's like, oh, no, I was high as fuck. Like, you know, he was smoking, like, heavy. And kind of like, you know, the way I envisioned Gary when I was first thinking about this is, like, he was just like, oh, I'm going to look up stuff in the computer, like, you know, very nerdish. But he's like, the way he describes it is like he's sitting there with a can, a cigarette, and smoking a joint at the same time, just like fucking blazed off his head, kind of like just reading this shit.
I mean, like, it does change the scenario. Like, if he's like a guy who is like sitting in a basement, just like enhance, you know what I mean? Like, going through stuff and actually trying to work out what it is that he's looking at. But like, he's just absolutely heavy stoned at his banger. Just like, oh, does that say? I bet like so he reads the sentence non-terrestrial traveller and he's just like, fuck, man. Like he didn't remotely decide to try and question it like we did by spitballing for the whole of 2 or 3 seconds there. It was just like, non-terrestrial travellers, they must be like greys or some shit. You know what I mean?
Interestingly enough as well, there's a point where he talks about having seen an image of like a cigar-shaped object, you know, travelling in the air. He saw an image of this while he was on NASA's servers, but he forgot to take a screenshot of it. So it's all quite convenient that, you know, he has all this information, but absolutely zero evidence of any of it.
It was a cigar-shaped blunt flying towards his mouth.
Look, I mean, like, I kind of get the feeling of Gary McKinnon that, like, maybe he just had his mouse, like, he was going to click on something, then he moved his mouse, and he was like, pretty, and he was just, like, watching the mouse go round in circles rather than clicking on stuff. But, you know, as you say, the cigar object, he probably just dropped a cigarette and ended up staring at it for 20 minutes. It's got some sort of cryptic writing, Marlborough Gold? What does it mean?
I seen a cigar-shaped object and it smelled and tasted like grape, and yeah, that's a blunt joke anyway. Just just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just the way Gary was hacking these computers was he used a system called Perl, and he just searched for dead passwords on government computers. So by dead passwords, this is just like a lot of the government computers, like when they put them in, the people just didn't put in even a basic password. It was just blank, like, you know.
Perl's a programming language, so essentially it's just like he was just running scripts.
Yeah.
That, like as you said, essentially he was just like running scripts that were just trying to bang in as many generic passwords as possible. Blank password, the same as username, administrator, that type of shit. Stuff that out the box passwords and all.
Default
as far
stuff.
as I can make out from, I had a bit of a look into trying to understand his process, and essentially all he done was use 4 or 5 different kind of, I'll call them off the shelf, but essentially readily available pieces of software that were out there that done this. They were essentially password breakers, and they ran scripts that would just chain them all together. So instead of just running one, he was running like 15 or whatever, 10 at the same time, and they were just concurrently all running through a whole shitload of standardized passwords, and essentially what we call now in IT, we would call it a brute force attack, which is just, they were just banging in as much information as possible to try and get a result. Just so happens, which I think you're about to touch on here, is the fact the amount of information they had to bang in was actually blank passwords. so he was hitting them quite fast.
Yeah, I mean, like, you'd imagine, but like this is pre 9/11 when he's starting, so it's kind of like a different atmosphere that the US is like, yeah, internet schminternet, we don't really care what's happening, I can't imagine now a major government not having passwords on their computer, but then again, I wouldn't have imagined them letting Hillary Clinton keep her own emails, so, same sort of thing is kind of happening now.
Yeah, I think today the Tory the Conservative Party conference app got hacked, and every single attendee that's registered with the Tory party got like their email, their mobile phone, like all their address, everything all hacked. So this stuff still does happen because people are still stupid.
So the thing is, and just like for the listeners to understand, if anyone's not kind of into this world, when we say hack, I mean it's not like somebody was sitting there with a DOS prompt typing away, do you know what I mean, and doing like it's an exploited hole that was in it, do you know what I mean? The information was essentially there. Like, to give you kind of a bit off topic, but to give you a quick idea of the way that certain hacks work, there was quite a big one that happened as a precursor to the Occupy movement and stuff like that all happened in the United States. And essentially the guy who went to jail over this, he discovered that on a AT&T server, he could just the web address that you all see, your HTTP // that address, if he just incremented the number by 1 every time, it would give you like the username and the password of each person's. Essentially, it would give you the email address and the name of every person that was like registered on it. So he was able to run a script that just ran an increment of 1 every time and took all the data. And because it was the AT&T servers, it was getting like the personal email addresses of like Secretary of States and guys in charge of NASA and the guys in charge of Disney and all sorts of stuff, because they all used it for their mobile internet. It's the same basic principle as what happened today with the Tories. It's no like somebody was there trying to break it. It was just that like they don't... And excuse my French, but essentially they don't give a shit about the data that's there, and they just the way it was put to us when we were at the Byline Festival, and it gives you kind of an idea of the way that the software works, was there's a guy who's pushing it, who's a project manager, and he wants a bit of software to go out, so he wants the end result to look like X. He doesn't fully understand or give a shit about what the background Y looks like. So whether or not that's secure or not before X is achieved, he doesn't really care, and they don't really test the Y as well as they should, providing that the X looks correct. So a lot of times, like this app would have been pushed out in it would have been developed in a relatively small window, and essentially it done all the things that they were going to do, but they didn't properly test it, and that's why they lost fucking all their telephone numbers today. Which was definitely devastating for the Tories, because there only is about 15 of them in the UK anyway.
I think it was a case of, Quentin, shall I call tech support? No, that sounds rather beastly. Let's just stick our email in here and hope.
Your tea was shite.
The thing about Gary was he was actually quite crafty, when he was going to do these hacks. So he used a computer that belonging to his girlfriend's aunt. He went to her house, and from there he discovered that a lot of the computer networks belonging to the US government had no computer admin passwords. There was no local administrator. So if he managed to log into the network as the admin, he could access any computer on the system. So, he could just jump into any random computer. So he'd say, I like the look of Pentium processor 6, jump into that, and he would just be on the computer. So he was logged on remotely. So he would just be moving his mouse around inside the computer, clicking on files and trying to find information. But because of that, he could only log on to computers which are turned on and online. And if you're actually looking at the computer screen at the time, you'd be able to see Gary moving the mouse around, opening up files and folders, trying to find different aeroplane models or space things that he was looking for at the time. So it was quite conspicuous. And for this reason, McKinnon was just trying to use the computers in outside odd hours, times when the US government, he thought there'd be no officials. So,
and if you're in the UK, that was probably pretty easy to manage that.
Yeah, I think it was Gary's routine that, he'd have a couple of beers, smoke a couple of joints, and just wait for the US government to go offline, and then he would just hack them at that point.
Stoned at his banger, just and he's in his auntie's house or whatever, just stoned at his eye, just I'm gonna go on, I'm fucking sick of hairdressing, I'm gonna break into NASA. 4:00 in the morning.
Aye, it just seemed really kind of odd that, it's just hanging around his girlfriend's aunt house, she would let him just stay out all night, just hanging around his girlfriend's aunt's house. I don't think I could hang around my actual aunt's house and just do that, But he seemed pretty chill and being able to do that, which is pretty good for him.
Maybe she had loads and loads and loads of free AOL discs for free internet usage, so it wasn't costing him anything, possibly.
I mean that, or he was just using the whole hacking thing as an excuse to sleep with his girlfriend's aunt, and he just went way over into his method acting to try and get away with it.
Also because he was having sex with her aunt.
Oh, what are you doing? I'm going to break into NASA. That was his euphemism. In fact, all of this is just a lie, right? It's just fucking been blown out of proportion. He done it.
It's an elaborate cover up. He had to learn
done
to
it
hack
once
just
and get caught. And he's just I've been doing it for 97 machines. Aye, convenient, isn't it? But in fact, he was just banging her auntie.
Sometimes you tell one little lie to try and cover up another lie, and then things just get out of control, and you're just oh no, I really don't know. I should have just fessed up at the beginning. This is getting too crazy for me, man. I really don't know what's going on. Okay, just let me be the hacker now. I'll just say I'm the hacker.
I want that to be the scenario so far.
Hey, we've all been there.
Looking at himself in the mirror every day at the moment, just this has got out of control. Can we go
Yeah. Next thing he has to pretend he has Asperger's.
The thing about Gary during this period was he was taking a lot of crazy risks, that he was looking around and he was going at different times, looking at all these computers, and he had very little security. He was saying he was seeing all these other people from all these other countries hacking at the same time, Thailand and Holland and Germany. So he kind of thought if everyone else is looking, I'll have a look too. But once or twice, he had very near misses. That there was a time that, he was just looking at this computer and a guy opens a word pad when he's on the computer saying hey, what's up? What's going on here? But Gary decided he'd just bluff the guy.
I did actually. He says I'm a system admin doing work on this. Just ignore me. The guy's aye, sure, that's all right. It's man, you're the Department of Defense. You're shit. Your fucking job, man.
Yeah, but I think it's really important for the listeners to understand that this is pre 9/11, that Gary was doing his hacks, starting about 2000, 2001, before 9/11. So, like, everything seemed a lot more chill back then. That, the US were just like, computer for nerds. We don't really care. It doesn't really matter at all if, people hack our stuff, because, nothing's important on a computer. Then after 9/11, they're like, we must secure the computers. We must secure everything. We must secure the airports. Like, I remember watching all these movies as a kid, like, Home Alone, where Macaulay Culkin goes to the airport and, someone knocks him over and he picks up someone else's ticket and he ends up somehow in New York. And you're just like, no, that would be absolutely impossible. But, like, back then, there seemed like a real possibility that you could just, like, bumble around and somehow, like, break security. And everyone's like, oh, well, you didn't break anything there.
I know, if you've been to actually a modern airport, what would happen is everybody runs to the gate and then they'd be like fucking queuing for 25 minutes, 30 minutes waiting for the plane to fucking land. And then maybe another 10 or 15 minutes. And then when they get there, you would have to show your passport and it would beep. And it's just a nightmare from start to finish. There would be no running through the airport and going to the wrong gates. Just Home Alone. Essentially what we're saying is, since 9/11 ruined the chance of Home Alone ever happening. I hear what you're saying. It's one of the biggest problems with 9/11.
And wrecking the feasibility of Home Alone is the worst thing Osama bin Laden has ever done. Osama! Speaking of Osama, around this time, because of the lack of 9/11 security laws, Gary was just, he just thought he could hack anything. And, this became what he thought was his true calling in life. So he ended up quitting his job to full-time research aliens and go and hack the NSA website. He quit just for the sole purpose of this. And he goes into his girlfriend and just simply says, here, Jasmine, great news. I quit my job so I can do this full-time.
I can understand why he quit his job though, because searching for UFOs on the internet
and
is
and everybody knows that endless amounts of weed and beer is free, so there was no reason for him to have a job.
I mean, maybe he had thought of some like ludicrous scheme to try and make money out of it, but I really can't see what he was up to.
Just phoning NASA up, just like, I've got copies of your black and white pictures of cigar-shaped objects. I expect some money, and NASA would be like, "Who the fuck are you? Don't phone us again, you lunatic!" Just like, oh, I wish I didn't quit my job now. Could always go back to hairdressing, I suppose.
Well, as you'd expect, if you'd suddenly came home and told your girlfriend you'd quit your job to search for aliens, Jasmine dumped Gary and just immediately started seeing off her people while Gary was still living in the apartment. So Gary was just like looking for aliens while his ex-girlfriend was like trying to move on to new men. It was a messed up situation. So moving the story forward, Gary eventually did get caught. Now this was after 9/11 had happened. So the US had started to increase security. So this was in March 2002. So somebody came across Gary trying to like open files on a computer. And rather than just opening a text folder and saying, hey, what's up, bro? They just like immediately went onto the networking device and just like side-clicked disconnect. And Gary was thrown off the internet. And he knew at the time he had messed up, but he just didn't think this was such a big deal. He just continued to kind of like move on. And later that month, on the 19th of March, he woke up with the police there in his like apartment, just arresting him and saying like, Gary McKinnon, you're under arrest for cyber crimes. And the worst thing for him was he had clearly went out the night before and he had stayed out. He said he stayed out till like 4 a.m. and he was like drunk. So it's like, imagine waking up 9 o'clock in the morning with a massive hangover and the police are there saying like, Gary, you're going to prison for hacking.
Oh, so when he got lifted, he was absolutely.
Where's he getting the money for this?
Where's he getting the money for this? He was like steaming in that and stoned at his face. Just like, shh, guys, come here. I've found some fucking aliens.
But I mean, I kind of can understand that being the 19th. He's clearly had a long St. Patrick's Day weekend. He's done the one day and he thought, oh man, I gotta do the second day. And then suddenly he wakes up and there's cops, man. That's the worst feeling, dude.
The story just seems like, I mean, like, fair play. He was logging onto machines, right? And they didn't have passwords, so he was getting into them quite easy. And he's in this entire time hadn't really got any evidence. But do you not think at this point, before we go into the court case side of things and all that kind of stuff, do you not think at this point that when you're the police and you're sent there, you'd be like, really though? Like, do you not think there's even a point where maybe they're concerned that they have got stuff worth stealing at NASA? Because otherwise, would you not just be like, this guy's off his head. this guy's just a lunatic.
I like the idea that the police turned up at his door and he was like, "How did you find me? You changed the screensaver on one of the NASA computers to like a list of your address and a little picture of you with your thumbs up. What did you do that for, Gary? He's a fucking idiot. It's not like he's a master hacker by the sound of things, eh?"
I mean, like, Gary's relationship with NASA seems almost like he's the kind of guy who's, like, texts them at, like, 3 a.m. being like, you up?
Oh, I hope I didn't download black and white
Except he was
pictures
like,
of
"Oh, I hope I
cigar-shaped
didn't hack
objects."
NASA last
As he
night.
turns over and realises he's lying next to a half-eaten kebab. Like, you okay, hun? To NASA. I say I keep sending NASA dick pics at 4 a.m.
Oh, yeah, but the situation for Gary at this point was starting to look really bad because, you know, the US government had managed to trace him, and they actually had traced him via a really, really simple way because, you know, all the hacking software, all the Perl that Gary had used, he actually had signed on with it with his own email address. So they were just like, okay, Gary McKinnon at hotmail.com. Let's type in Gary McKinnon and find out where he lives. And, you know, they quickly found him and they quickly got the UK government to go and arrest him. And, you know, very soon after that, the United States was filing court proceedings and they claimed that, like, McKinnon had caused $800,000 worth of damage to US military computers.
How much? 800,000? I thought you said 8,000 there. I was going to say, right. It's not really.
It's 700,000, but there seems to be a dispute. It's somewhere around 7 or 800,000. And he said, like, they caused this much damage to computers. He had deleted munitions logs from Navy computers, which temporarily paralyzed the supply of weapons to the US Atlantic Fleet. So, if you had imagined to do this, you know, the Scottish guy had just, like, somehow sabotaged the Navy. And pretty much initially what the United States said was, here, if you agree to pay for your own flight to come over to the United States and we can arrest you, we'll put you into jail for 3 or 4 years. And Gary McKinnon basically turned to his lawyer and said, like, oh, okay, I shouldn't do this, should I? And she said, oh, I'd take the deal. And he said, oh, can they extradite me? And he said no. And then he was like, okay, you know, just walked away whistling to himself, thinking, you know, not going to hear about this again. And McKinnon, when he had hacked the computers, had left threatening and disparaging messages on the logs of US computers. Firstly saying, your security is crap. And secondly stating, US foreign policy is akin to government-sponsored terrorism these days. It was not a mistake that was huge security stand-downs on 9/11 last year. I am solo. I will continue to disrupt at the highest levels.
I mean, I love that, right? Like, the reason I love that is because even though we've joked about it, right? The fact that he was going on, the fact that he already gave himself a hacker name, and he was solo, and I believe that there was a lot of times that he was solo, but he had his own hacker name.
I love the idea. I love the idea that he's given himself a hacker name, like, oh, I'm some sort of...
I like the fact that he didn't choose a name like Enigma, but he chose a name like Lonely. You know what I mean? They call me No Friends. Oh, that's quality, Gary. Can you choose another name? No, it's No Friends. That's how the Matrix works. So my problem with the whole bit is like, we've joked about it. Obviously, he's getting high, he's getting drunk and all that kind of stuff. The guy is an absolute, seems to be a bit of a pelter. But at the same time, he was stringing scripts together to try and break in. He was choosing the times that he was going into. He was leaving messages saying he is against American foreign policy. All those things are essentially a digital terrorist act. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really difficult to dress that as anything other than premeditated.
Yeah, well, especially if he's deleting files and deleting logs and stuff like that, you know.
Choosing your own Matrix name can be hard. What would you choose, Paul and Jerry, if you had to have a one snappy hacker name?
I see the problem is, so I'm shit. I don't even know what to have this conversation. So I have a name, like like not a hacker name, but I've got a name that is my online name, my online presence for everything in the world. Like as in on all. No, I near that too, but it's on. Yeah. I said yeah. Of course it is. It's my Twitter handle, so it doesn't fucking matter. But it's Gonzo Sinister, so that's on my Twitter handle. But I'm also on obviously Steam and Epic and Xbox Live and Xbox and everything. I mean, any forum, anything. I'm always Gonzo Sinister, and I have been for probably about 16 years, 15 years, 16 years. So I think that's my name. Some there's been a couple of slight variants, but some combination of Gonzo and usually Sinister, but it's always a Gonzo. So I mean, if I had to just be one snappy, I'd probably be Gonzo, but I imagine find myself in a legal dispute over that.
So Gonzo Sinister, is that like a rapist Muppet?
Well, I mean, if you know much about Gonzo, he only shags chickens, so that's quite sinister.
Can you have consensual sex with a chicken? Asking for a friend.
Well, you know, you can have sinister sex with a chicken, which is what I'm suggesting.
Is that when you tie a chicken to a train track and then make sweet, sweet love to it, or what?
Aye, pretty much. That's the only way I have sex with chickens. I don't know about you freaks.
So it's okay as long as the chicken's into it. In answer to your question, I'm Kid Pyramid and have been again since I was about 16-year-old. That's just a mash together of two, like a Radiohead song and a Radiohead album.
The problem is with Kid Pyramid is you sound like the fucking Illuminati.
Who said that wasn't?
Me.
What would yours be, Luke?
I had to change mine because I was for years, it would be the same handle that I would use in the Discord. I would normally just go by my first names, which would be Luke and Patrick. But I used to have the number 88 connected with it, and that's still what it is for, that's the year of my birth, like 1988. But I learned about a year ago when I was joining another Discord that the number 88 is pretty synonymous with neo-Nazis, because 88 is also like 8, the eighth letter is HH, so people see it as Heil Hitler. So I joined another group. They're like, dude, we're not letting a guy in if he's got like 88 as part of his name.
Well, I mean, that's mental.
Well, I mean, like, it's mental, but like certain numbers, I suppose, are attached to things, isn't it? Like, suppose I was going to say like MS-13, but 13's attached to loads of other stuff as well, isn't it? And I'm sure there's another one. There's another Nazi number.
Combat 18 was
Combat 18, that's the other one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, the group I joined was like the Chapo Trap House Discord, and they would be actually pretty far left.
Yeah.
So, there'd be a lot of people there who I'd say, would be very, very wary. So, I wouldn't be that politically left, but joining that, they were like, no, either change it or get out. No shoes, no shirt, no service.
I like sometimes I would have went by the username I love Jimmy Savile, but after all the stuff came out, I felt I had to change that as well.
For real?
Not for real. Fuck's sake.
No, because it was actually I loved Jimmy Savile, and people got a bit worried about it.
Yeah. I can imagine that being a lot of trouble. That I don't know. Actually, I'd tell you the story, but it's like one of the people who I would be a postman in my town was a huge Gary Glitter fan and had a Gary Glitter tattoo. And you can imagine, like, how quickly he got rid of that.
Well, it's like Lost Prophet fans.
Oh man,
There's a lot of Lost Prophet fans that wish they didn't have those tattoos.
I mean, let's be honest, Lost Prophet fans were ball bags before he was a pedo.
I mean, like, it's just like Lost Prophets are pish, and you shouldn't like him, and he's a pedo. It's like as a footnote to those other two components.
Aye. Well, I felt very sorry for. Do you know H from Steps? His name is also Ian Watkins. So when journalists were looking for like the musician Ian Watkins, a lot of them were putting up pictures of H from Steps. We had to go on to like Twitter and be like, "I am not a pedo. I'm just like a children's entertainer who happens to be gay, but like I'm not a pedo. Leave me alone, guys."
The other thing as well is, like, if you Google search and you Google search a name and you know that one of them has been deemed as a paedophile, you look at, you're just like, it's the one for Steps, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's your go-to before you even read the rest of the story. You're just like, Ian Watkins, and then you type in his name, it's just like, the guy for Steps, and you just automatically presume that's who it is because, you know, Guy for Steps turns out to be a pedo. Not hugely shocked by that.
The other thing is, like, H from Steps also had problems when he tried to join the Chapo Trap House Discord server because they were like, H, no, mate, no, it means Hitler.
Or Heil. None of those two things are what we want.
Yeah. As I said earlier, although McKinnon had admitted to committing a crime, he was not arrested in the UK, was allowed to continue with the rest of his life, pretty much with no immediate repercussions. The police said, "Do you want to, the Americans want you to take this 3 to 4 year deal?" And he was like, "No deal," and just walked out, like, whistling this doop-de-doop-de-doo. I'm going to now buy a 6-pack of Fosters and go back to my computer. Although I do believe at the time the police gave him, like, the loose warning, do not be on computers, and they still kept his computer, but I don't think there was any immediate ban saying he couldn't do it anymore. But behind the scenes, the US government began to pass a lot of legislation to stop terrorism. So this is the era of like the Patriot Act and heavy NSA surveillance. And the US were getting like black sites for torture outside of the US borders, places like Gitmo and black sites in Poland, torture people. So Gary should really have been watching his neck a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just like the idea that it was just like, you've been arrested. What you're going to do while we're looking at it? I'm going to go and shag my ex's auntie. And
I wonder what Janice's aunt's up to.
I'm going to,
or Jasmine, sorry.
I'm going to Jasmine's aunt's house to get into the deep web, if you know what I mean. I'm relatively confident that's what he was doing, but I would have thought they would have stopped him from being able to be near a computer at all, rather than just being like, we're going to keep your computer, try no and use another one.
Well, it's the thing was that he was banned from using a computer, but from what I understand, that's when the deportation attempt was happening. I don't think he was initially banned from using a computer, but I could be wrong. The timeline's a little bit hazy, but from what I've read, I don't believe he was initially banned from using a computer when he was arrested in 2002.
I remember reading that at one point he had to sign into a local police station every evening.
Yeah. Again, I think that's when the deportation order came out, that he had to sign into a police station, but I think initially he didn't, from what I understand of the timeline. Again, I could be incorrect, that it seems that, like, initially when he was arrested, he did get, like, very little happened to him. And at this time, it's important to note that the UK government was pretty much willing to do whatever the US government wanted. E.g., like, the US said, like, here, we're going to invade Afghanistan. The UK was like, we're with you, buddy. And they said, we're going to invade Iraq. And Tony Blair was like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. Yeah, we've got a special relationship, and we're just totally going to do whatever Bush says. So the UK passed a piece of legislation called the Extradition Act in 2003. This, combining with a new US-UK extradition treaty, meant it was far easier to deport people from the UK to America, although it didn't really work the other way around. So at the time, the UK government was saying, here, can we get some of the IRA guys who fled to New York? And the US is like, no, fam, Like, we cool, but, like, can we have some of yours?
Well, it doesn't really seem very fair, does it?
No, it didn't. But, like, it's after 9/11, Britain was pretty much saying anything America wants, we'll give to them. And, the extradition treaty, it's been described by different people as being incredibly one-sided, because the US were able to ask for an extradition without evidence, only needing reasonable suspicion. So, if you know anything about police and reasonable suspicion, the police can search your car because they don't like the look of you because they have a reasonable suspicion that you would have been, like, you're smuggling something or something. It's very loose territory that you can get away with an awful lot just put under reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, I mean, in the west of Scotland, they ran an operation called Operation Spotlight, which was essentially if you looked like you might be committing a crime, then they were able to, like, stop and search you, which, as you can imagine, if you look like you might be committing a crime or you might have criminal leanings, is very open to interpretation. So you can just use it to harass people you don't like, be it race.
Their suspicion is that the person has curly hair and a big set of lips, kind of way.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, that easily could be. Now, in the west of Scotland, the person wearing a crucifix around their neck, or the person, being probably Asian is more likely. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, essentially that it suddenly becomes a way to manage the masses than it actually is to cut down in crime. Like, it always gets abused, and I believe looking at the extradite stuff from America, it's much the same as the Patriot Act in the US and some of the equivalent stuff that we have here.
Terrorism Act.
Yeah, it's pretty much because it's so open to interpretation.
It's open to abuse as well.
It's open to abuse, yeah. I mean, essentially, you can hold anyone for anything because you can find things to hold them that loosely connect because it's so open-ended. I mean, the idea behind all of these things is that you can't, if you found someone, or the justification for all these things is you find someone who has committed X crime, you need to be able to get them over to be able to hold them accountable. So you can't set anything in stone, so it then means you've got the best chance of being able to get them over, or you've got the best chance of being able to hold them in detention. But obviously it's massively open to abuse, where you could find yourself, trying to get rid of a drunk, possibly autistic stoner that's shagging somebody's auntie because there wasn't any passwords on your computer. You know what I mean?
In the UK, under the Terrorism Act, you can hold somebody for an indefinite amount of time without having to present any evidence to any kind of court, which is kind of mental. And it's fine if you don't have a government that's abusing it, but the legislation's there, and if you had a government which wanted to abuse it, they could do. Interestingly enough, I've found some information about the extradition. It was in June 2005, which was actually when the UK finally enacted the Extradition Act. So it was a 2003 Act, but we didn't implement it until 2005. At that point in June, when that happened, that was when McKinnon became subject to bail conditions, and that included a requirement to sign in at his local police station every evening, and he had to remain at his home address at night.
He had to be at his home address?
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to go around to his...
he wasn't allowed to go see the auntie? It depends what his home address was, if he had put that down as his home address, though.
Smart thinking, Gary.
Basically, put down his home address as Jasmine's auntie's pants, so, always have, there, But,
that's where I'm staying. Am I right, guys? I'm not solo this evening.
Yeah.
The worst type of person. Not me, him.
Yeah. Well, the thing was that the UK, that they started doing this when the UK signed it in 2005, but from the US side, they didn't sign it till 2006. So it became law in both countries. And with that, around 2005, 2006, the US began making a serious push to get Gary McKinnon extradited to the United States. they had put in 2005 a request for Gary McKinnon to be extradited, and now with the legislation, the process seemed pretty inevitable. Like Gary thought in 2002 when he was arrested, whoop-de-doo, I don't have to be bothered. But at this point, he's now seriously thinking, oh goodness, maybe it would have been better for me to take the 3 or 4 years that they were promising me. And Gary was under certain bail conditions from this point, as Jerry said. He had to sign into a local police station each evening, and he had to remain at his home address each night. So, it was pretty hard going for Gary. And at this point, McKinnon, with the help of his mother, began to appeal against the extradition in UK courts, leading McKinnon's case to the House of Lords, which is the UK's highest court at the time. And I believe, is the House of Lords still the highest court, or is there a Supreme Court in the UK now?
So yes and no. So obviously you've got the European Court, which fundamentally which governs British law. Do you know what I mean?
Not for much longer.
No, not for much longer, but currently, and certainly at the time it did. So, or not at the time, but a year ago, and just now. Whereas, I don't 100% hold me this, but as far as I'm aware, our equivalent to the American Supreme Court is essentially the European Court, as in with relevance to the power that it has over the decision. But don't 100% hold me with that, but I believe that's the way. Is that not correct, Jerry?
Right, so what happened was the House of Lords, up until November 2009, the Law Lords and the House of Lords was the highest court in England and Wales, and that's now been replaced by the Supreme Court from November 2009 onwards. Scotland operates a different system of law.
All right, so it's different. So it is different for us than it is England?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
I mean, the House of Lords... That's another issue. If you're going to do an episode in the House of Lords, definitely have us back, because I've got lots of things to say about that.
Well, the House of Lords is an odd thing, but I think we almost touched on it when we were discussing the royal family, but we didn't, or I didn't during that episode. But yeah, I imagine it's a pretty crazy place. But yeah, McKinnon's lawyer claimed that McKinnon was coming under a lot more pressure to sign the 3 to 4 year deal to go to a US prison, rather because if he was deported, he risked 70 years. So the US were just hand yourself in. But, it was kind of a form of harassment, because if McKinnon went over there, they didn't write in paper that, how long he was going to spend there. It was kind of like an informal agreement, and once he went to the United States, there was a good chance that, they could completely renege on the deal and say, nah, you're here as long as we want you to be here. And, if he went over there, McKinnon would waive all his legal rights, and a plea bargain wouldn't be agreeable under British law, so pretty much he'd be completely bound to what the Americans decided to do with him. So, at the end of the day, the 3 or 4 years would sound like a pretty rough deal if he ended up taking it. So McKinnon's appeal was moved to Europe's highest court, the European Court of Human Rights, who temporarily suspended the extradition order. But after a lengthy appeal, it was rejected, meaning it looked like McKinnon was going to be deported. And this was taking up a lot of years, so the High Court was 2008, and in 2009, was the European Court of Human Rights. So, this process kept going longer and longer and longer. So McKinnon began to ask for a judicial review from the High Court, claiming the hacker was at a high risk of suicide if he was extradited. The argument was that the Home Secretary had not taken this into consideration when agreeing to extradite. However, lawyers from Jackie Smith, the Home Secretary, successfully argued the chance of an extradition to Gary McKinnon's health was low. So
yeah, I think it's interesting to state at this point that when up until now, 2009, all of Gary McKinnon's case has essentially happened under a Labour government in power, and Home Secretary Jackie Smith at this point was Labour politician, but the Tories sort of began putting political pressure on in Gary McKinnon's favour, whether that's because they genuinely believed in his cause, or in my opinion, it might just be because they were using him to play a little bit of a political game and to score political points.
Well, this was the era that was David Cameron was going to the Arctic and trying to be seen with all these polar bear puppies and stuff, and they changed the Conservative logo to a tree, so they were really trying to soften their image, being like, we're Conservatives, but we care. So, it would have definitely been on brand for the Conservatives to be backing Gary McKinnon in this case.
I mean, to put that into perspective now, if you can imagine current UK politics, if you can imagine, we're talking about the same people. They were just a shadow government. Do you know what I mean? We're talking about, but I couldn't imagine almost any of them defending possibly suicidal / autistic, but certainly a British hacker, no matter how easy it was for hacking, to not be sent over to America. I mean, I just could not imagine anyone in the current Tory government willing to stand up for the rights of that person at the present moment.
Yeah, and also, let's be honest, nobody really since 2010 has ever said, oh, the Tory government, they're really kind to disabled people.
Not at all. But the story became actually so big at this time that a famous man from Cambridge University, Simon Baron-Cohen, saw Gary McKinnon on TV speaking, and Baron-Cohen is an expert in the subject of autism, so he invited McKinnon to come to meet him at Cambridge University, and over a 3-hour meeting, he came to the conclusion that Gary suffered from Asperger's, which is a high-functioning form of autism. So he wrote a paper to the High Court saying that Gary is, in his professional opinion, autistic, and therefore would not be able to handle the extradition. The thing is that, though, as Jerry alluded to, that the Conservative Party was using Gary McKinnon as one of their pet causes, because it looked at the time like there was an upcoming election between when Gordon Brown his term was going to end in 2010 at the very latest. So, this was part of the Conservative strategy, was, trying to seem more sympathetic. And Gary McKinnon had a growing level of support, especially in Scotland. So many Scottish newspapers, for instance the Glasgow Herald or the Scotsman, began running articles in support of Gary McKinnon, and Scottish entrepreneur Luke Heron added to Gary McKinnon's legal fund. So at this point, it was good for Gary because, he had the legal fund and he had a way of supporting, going to the pub each evening, which he did say that he was doing at this point because he was heavily depressed. So he was spending a lot of time reading newspapers in pubs, he said, during this time. And
I do that.
Sorry?
I like.
Oh, no. No, I mean, just he said that he was deeply depressed by the whole thing, so he was drinking away his problems.
I think maybe Luke Heron would like to sponsor my reading newspapers and drinking in pubs.
Yeah,
I mean, if you had spent your entire last, say, 5 years banging somebody's aunt and reading the internet, and then suddenly you couldn't do either because you had to be home at a certain time of night, and you only had newspapers to read.
Yeah, I'd probably be pretty depressed.
It'd be a very different way of life. Can't imagine it was that easy for him to get hold of weed either at that point, because the police were probably keeping an eye on him.
Aye, well, he said that he quit weed about 2003, 2004, but he said, he felt it was completely clouding his judgment, so he quit it back then.
I think he might have had a point.
He made some terrible life choices in that period just before he decided to stop smoking it.
Well, it's kind of like there was an interview with him from the Telegraph in about 2005, and like Telegraph was asking, like, what do you remember about, the stuff, and he couldn't remember it. But he said that, like, when the US were trying to extradite him initially, he tried to do the hard man. Oh, I've got information that you wouldn't like me to reveal, so why don't you drop your case? So the US just simply replied, "What information do you have?" And Gary couldn't remember a single thing because he was high and wasted at the time when reading it.
I saw a photo. Did you screenshot it or anything? No.
I mean, so I would actually like to. So look, as a follow up, can you get, and maybe maybe already this piece of information is known. Can you get Gary's opinion on what he thinks happened in 9/11?
Oh, he doesn't believe 9/11 was an inside job. He actually does believe that 9/11 was normal. From what he says, he isn't into those conspiracy theories.
But that doesn't really tie in with what he's supposed to have left on that computer, because he essentially said that it was no coincidence that their security stood down, right?
Well, it's one of those things that he said at that time, but I've read in interviews since that, different people are interviewing him, and he's not really that into conspiracy theories. This is from articles from about 2009, 2010, so he might have previously believed it, but I think later on he didn't believe in things like 9/11 quite so much.
It's just weird that I always find it strange when you find someone who is heavily into lots of fringe conspiracy theories, but then takes another fringe conspiracy theory and is just like, well, that's just fucking madness. like I love the way that people draw the line on certain things.
Interestingly, though, Gary McKinnon is a flat earther.
Is he actually?
No, I don't know.
Oh, that would have been the best thing. I was so excited there when you said that.
Hashtag fake news.
Well, when I was on his Twitter account, there was an awful lot of... He did seem to have an awful lot of, like, still space alien stuff. Was a high... he's very into reposting stuff about science and aliens, which he was doing quite a bit.
Like immigrants or...
No.
Space aliens?
Mostly in space aliens, yeah.
I wasn't sure if he was like a UKIP voter or something.
Mostly non-terrestrial travellers, Jerry. Not those terrestrial travellers. It's interesting. Like, I mean, I presume that the reason that he's still like, I think it's reasonable to say that. I mean, I'm using this. I'm using this in the correct terms for what we're discussing here. Not anything to do with my opinion on these things. But I'm guessing he believes in aliens, as in he believes there has been contact, and he believed that's the story that why he got into it all. And I believe that. I would be shocked if he didn't still believe that, especially because he is adamant that he's seen evidence to say that he has. So I would presume that forever he will believe that there has been extraterrestrial contact with certainly the American, if not other governments around the world. Like, I would be shocked if he had lost that belief.
I would be too, but I'm not necessarily sure that he's like... He's not great at making decisions about anything, seemingly.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to make the best choices. But
the thing is, right, so the problem with this is, right, and I'm sure actually we've discussed it before, like, but my issue with that is that plays into the diagnosis, or certainly some components of what they called at the time Asperger's, or certainly some form of autism on the scale, where, like, you could argue that he was making poor decisions that because he didn't really understand what the outcome of his decisions were going to be, etc.
Yeah, we're going
but
to...
like I say,
sorry.
But all I was going to say with that is it doesn't really, for me, when we were just talking about it there, how he makes bad decisions, that doesn't really lend itself to the fact that, in my opinion, he does like lots of... he does lots of things like choose what time he's going to be going on and leave messages. And you know what I mean? Like, he does lots of things that suggest that he was very aware of what he was doing and why he was doing it.
There was certainly a malicious aspect to it, I would agree with you there that like it wasn't that he was just looking for stuff, but he did seem to be looking for trouble at the same time.
So what was the eventual outcome of all the legal proceedings against him then, Luke?
So basically, after David Cameron got elected by the Conservative Party under the kind of we're a new kind of conservatives, the extradition feeling was pretty strong. Like, people didn't want it. But David Cameron met people like President Obama initially, and he was saying that we're looking for an adequate solution. But Obama, like Bush, was still pushing to get McKinnon sent over. Like, they wanted a result. And McKinnon was still left hanging, that it wasn't something that David Cameron immediately acted on, that it ended up that Gary was still signing into police stations and still dealing with all this crap while, Cameron was pretty much sitting on his hands. And eventually, what happened on the 16th of October in 2012, so 10 years after the arrest, Prime Minister Theresa May announced the extradition had been blocked by her personally in front of the House of Commons. She had put down a barring order, and she said that there was too much of a fear that Gary McKinnon would kill himself or hurt himself, and there was a bad potential that bad things could happen to him if he went. Doubtless bad things would happen to you if you were deported, but she said like the risk was too high, so she was just drawing a line under it. But what was said was, Mr. McKinnon is accused of serious crimes. There is no doubt that he is seriously ill. He has Asperger's syndrome and suffers from depressive illness. Mr. McKinnon's extradition would give rise to such high risks of him ending his life that a decision to extradite would be incompatible with Mr. McKinnon's human rights. So she blocked anything happening from deportation side, but also she kind of left it up in the air that he could still potentially be prosecuted in the UK for the crime. But because the crime had happened in America, the DPP, so the Public Prosecution Service, said they would not prosecute him because it was impossible, because due to all the evidence being in the United States, there was no real evidence on their side that McKinnon had committed a crime. So from this point, McKinnon was free and no longer had to sign into police stations. He was just, as long as he doesn't leave the UK, he seems relatively safe, and that's pretty much where his story ends. But there's an odd piece that came out about McKinnon in 2014, and it didn't make the most sense to me. Maybe you guys could help me with it. But in 2014, Gary McKinnon's real biological father had a stroke, and Gary wanted to go up to Scotland to see him, but contacted the Scottish government, or rather his mother Jackie contacted the Scottish government and said if he went up to Scotland, would there be a risk of him being extradited? And the Scottish government didn't give him an answer, so he didn't go up to Scotland.
So again, that'll be all based off what Jerry was talking about, how the laws and court system in Scotland are slightly different than they are in England and, well, I suppose Northern Ireland and Wales as well, but I don't really know with Northern Ireland, but certainly England and Wales. We have various different laws and the way that they are enforced and the way that our court hearings make decisions on people's guilt and stuff like that are all slightly different for the way that it happens in the rest of the UK.
Well, essentially we have a different court law, we have a completely different law system. So if you look at something more recent like Clara Ponsati, who was involved with the Catalan referendum, she's a Catalonian politician who is also a lecturer at the University of St Andrews, I believe. The extradition request didn't go to Westminster, it went to Holyrood, and it was them who were dealing with it, as far as I understand.
There was no fucking chance of it gone. Like, you know what I mean? Like the chances.
So essentially, if he went up to Scotland, there might be a chance of the USA requesting extradition from Scotland via the Scottish government.
The odd thing to me was when I Googled it, because I thought this was an odd story, I Googled it and said, extradition isn't a power the Scottish government has, it's still down to Westminster. So I was kind of a bit confused by the whole thing.
I mean, I might be talking shite, but that's my understanding.
I mean, I know certainly the problem is like I said, the the way that the laws are applied can be different because as Jerry said, it's a completely different legal system. So the danger might just be that him going to Scotland gives them the chance to loophole something. That's, you know what I mean? Like, we'll take a stab in the dark and say Gary's probably a bit paranoid as a person in the grand scheme of things all the time anyway. So just the fact that the laws are slightly different in Scotland, the fear that he was probably just belt and braces the scenario and like trying to make sure that if he went to Scotland, he wouldn't be tried or held accountable or anything like that in a different scenario. Do you know what I mean? I'm guessing that's the reason he done it. I can't be 100% certain. I would have thought for America, I know they don't do it on a country by country basis, but I'd have thought in America it would still go through Westminster. But I mean, it might go to Holyrood. I don't know.
Certainly, all of the legal proceedings with Clara Ponsati went through the Scottish police and went through the Scottish courts.
Indeed, I don't know if that's just because it's the EU or, you know what I mean. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't know where the difference would be there. But yeah, I mean, certainly just to say the danger would be, like I said, it's a different legal system in Scotland. So he was probably just paranoid. Well, I mean, he's definitely a paranoid person. Do you know what I mean? He was looking for fucking aliens on NASA's website, on NASA's computers.
As an interesting aside, obviously you were saying it was the Department of Public Prosecutions that basically chose not to prosecute him in the UK because the evidence was held in the US. It was Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time. He's the Labour Shadow Brexit Secretary at the moment, but that was his previous job.
Well, at least that means the Labour Party did do something decent in this story, because for a long part of it, they do seem to have been against McKinnon. But before we go into that, I'd just like to ask the question. So McKinnon was pretty much, they said, you know, because he was suicidal and that nothing happened to him and he didn't go to jail. So he was put under like 10 years of pretty intense pressure, but he didn't spend a single day in jail, although he was under house arrest, which was pretty harsh. So here's my question to you two. Do you think McKinnon should have gone to jail either in the UK or America?
So, I mean, I'll start quickly and say, like I said, I think it's very difficult to claim that he didn't know what he was doing or what there wasn't a malicious aspect to what he was doing. So, as such, I mean, he was a criminal, wasn't he? I mean, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing was a criminal act, and he knew there would be possible repercussions there. As such, probably should have went through the right process that ended up in jail. I mean, I believe that his diagnosis, as much as probably does ring true to an extent, as certainly we've spoke about off mic before, like there's lots of people who would be able to fall in various parts of the autistic scale if you really dug deep and you had to make that happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, it seemed very convenient that these things came up for him when I don't really think they were real driving forces behind his becoming a hairdresser, getting into IT, starting to hit NASA, leaving malicious letters and knowing exactly what he was doing, staying up late at night and doing it from a different house so it wasn't traceable back to him. Like, that's the act of someone who knew what they were doing as a criminal. So probably I'd say that he certainly deserves to go to jail. I mean, in actual terms, I believe that he should have taken the original American offer, went over, done about 4 years, and then ended up probably getting a job in some kind of quango of the United States Ministry of Defence, doing some form of like the Department of Department of DOD into the Department of Defence, doing something from an offshoot of the Pentagon, working in cybersecurity or working to at least show what he done to get to where he was and the information that he had, and probably getting a fucking healthy wage off the back of it as well for a few years. He probably should have done that. I would have imagined that even at the 4 years, he probably wouldn't have found himself serving those 4 years in an American prison. He'd have found himself going to the American prison for a small amount of time and then being on day release to agencies who wanted to find out what he knew and how he found out what he knew and how he went about doing what he was doing, so they could kind of clear it up. That's what I'd have expected would have happened if he just took that deal to start with. But that's what I think he should have done anyway. I mean, yeah, he probably should have went to jail. I think he's a criminal, and I think he knew what he was doing. Jerry?
I think my position is that certainly from a legal standpoint, he couldn't have went to jail in the UK because there was no evidence held in the UK. He didn't really commit a crime in the UK. He didn't break any UK laws, and as such, he didn't hack any UK systems or whatever. And there was no evidence held on him by any UK criminal prosecutors or criminal investigations teams, so there's no way he should have went to jail in the UK. I think he's extremely lucky that he didn't go to jail in the US. I do think that Asperger's diagnosis was extremely convenient for him. It didn't seem to affect him very much in lots of other walks of his life. He was able to hold down several jobs. He was able to have relationships with both a girl and her aunt. So as far as I'm concerned, he's a lucky boy.
Yeah, so I've got a question for the both of you, which is essentially, and if you could answer individually, if the tables were turned here and we had someone in the US who was hacking the UK into the MOD looking for something to do with Iraq or something, I don't know, but they were trying to find pieces of information to do with the British Ministry of Defence and exploiting their securities loopholes to do that. Would you expect them pretty much without question to be extradited to the UK to be held accountable for their actions if they were discovered?
I kind of feel they should, as a reciprocal relationship. If the UK wants the hacker, in that case, I would say that it would be the US's responsibility to hand them over to the UK. I would say that it should work both ways.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that. I think that the UK would and should expect a US citizen who had carried that sort of attack out to be extradited here and prosecuted, and I'm sure the US probably weren't that happy that we didn't give them what they would expect from a defensive ally.
Well, so I think that answers the question that had Luke answered before regarding the house arrest type stuff and whether he should have went to jail. What should have happened is he should have went to America to be extradited. He should have been extradited to America to be held accountable for his actions, because we would unquestionably expect it or want it to happen if the tables were turned. So I think that's what should have occurred, regardless of whether or not they then decide that he was either disabled in some way, or that meant that it was okay for his actions, or they decided that he didn't do what he had claimed to do or whatever. Is totally irrelevant. That would have been for their courts to decide.
I will say that I do agree with Luke that I don't think the US would actually do that, and I don't think they would have done it regardless of if the McKinnon case had never happened. I don't think they would extradite one of their citizens to the UK to be prosecuted anyway.
Well, I mean, the UK has now set the precedent, because there was another autistic hacker called Laurie Love who was attempted to be extradited in 2014, and because he was autistic and he was threatening suicide, they again said, no, the barring order from McKinnon stands, that, we're not going to send an autistic person over to America to face punishment for hacking. And, just saying my opinion on this, should he have went to jail in either the UK or the US, I think that if McKinnon had just been looking for stuff, I think the house arrest and all the pressure would have been a big enough punishment for him. Like the 10 years of stuff, I kind of feel that doing that sort of stuff, maybe he should have been punished. But deleting logs, basically writing threats on the page, I think that something should have happened to him for doing that. He was looking for trouble, and I think something should have happened to him. And
it's terrorism. It is terrorism. It's digital terrorism.
It is a form of digital terrorism, as you say. And I'm just going to say, should the Asperger's have been taken into as high consideration? Now, I'm going to just say a few things here just to kind of identify what my involvement with the field of people with autism is. First, I've been diagnosed with Asperger's myself, so I can say from first-hand opinion. Secondly, I've got a Master's of Science in Autism Spectrum Disorder, and I'm writing a PhD similarly on the same subject. And third, I work with people with learning disabilities, including autism. When I'm speaking about this, I'm not an expert, but I'd say I would have more information on the subject than the average person in the street. And just going by what his autism taken into consideration, the whole story seems a little bit odd to me because the way it is the Gary McKinnon stuff seems to be a split into two very definite sections. There's a stuff from 2005 and 2008 where Gary was doing all these interviews himself. He was going out, he was being charming, he seemed quite charismatic. He seemed like, capable of stuff, and he even released statements like, I'd survive prison if I had to, but I really don't want to. And he kind of seemed very strong-willed. And then, according to Baron Cohen, he saw McKinnon on television, and being kind of like the expert that he is, he thought this guy's showing some autistic traits. I'll invite him down to Cambridge. Actually, according to Jackie, McKinnon's mother, she also says that she was the one to get in contact with Baron Cohen because she put two and two together and thought her son had autism because there's a load of traits that she claims that he's had. For instance, he has a fear of red peppers. He wants he'll only eat. No, that's true. That's one of her reasons for saying this. He said he can't eat mushrooms unless it's sliced into 8 equal size pieces. She said like he was depressed and spending a lot of time alone in the dark, and when he was growing up, he would shout uncontrollably when on a bus, and he'd faint on the underground because of the amount of people around him. These eccentricities do point towards certain behaviors like this would indicate that he potentially would be on the autistic spectrum, and I would
I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to come across as insensitive there when I laughed about the fiery red peppers, but it is a ridiculous sentence to be presented with at any given point. Like, she probably could have removed that from the description and still have got the same basic principle. All the stuff about fainting, shouting, the dark, the depression, and that kind of stuff probably didn't need to include the fiery red peppers as a thing. In my opinion,
they are the scariest of all the peppers.
Well, that wasn't initially. That was from a 2015 article that she wrote, but I was just trying to link all the autistic traits that she mentioned that he had. And, once Baron Cohen took him in and said he had Asperger's, the entire situation around McKinnon seems to change. That instead of Gary doing all the interviews, it's his mum starts speaking for him. And she's doing all the kind of, oh, Gary would do this and Gary would do that. And you don't hear McKinnon speak at all, really, during this period. It's always his mother, Jackie, speaking on his behalf. And before it, he seemed to be quite, well-spoken. He'd do interviews, he had opinions. He went to kind of like Russia Today and all these places and was just doing all these sorts of speaking. And, the second that he got the autistic thing, it seems like they intentionally seemed to infantilize him in a kind of weird way, that it was like his mother was speaking for him, and then she was saying, well, Gary has all these problems, and he's always had all these problems, and it's very clear that he has, all these things. And, before that, he was a guy who was living on his own. He was a hairdresser, which, I'll be honest, is quite a social job. He had a girlfriend, he had an active social life. His friends were encouraging him to do this. I'm not saying that he didn't have Asperger's. What I'm simply indicating towards is autism is a wide spectrum, and I would say that there would be certain people who would be high-functioning autistic who might not be aware of what they were doing. They might not do this, but it kind of indicates that, I would say, I don't know Gary, and I've never spoken to Gary. Maybe I might get a different opinion, but I think they kind of deliberately made him out to be worse than he was, to kind of A, garner sympathy, and B, to take away his ability to deal with the situation, kind of say, oh, no, he's autistic. He wasn't able to, process all this stuff, all this sort of stuff.
It does, it certainly strikes me as a concerted PR campaign. Get the autism diagnosis and then play up to the symptoms of it, and as you say, deliberately infantilise him, deliberately keep him away from the camera, have his mother speaking about his condition and speaking about him, have other people speaking about his condition and speaking about him. I think it's worth noting that they raised a decent amount of money via the various campaigns in the papers, etc., and probably a decent amount of that money was spent on good lawyers, and that's the sort of advice a good lawyer would give.
I mean, also, look, you had just quickly, you had also pointed out that in the next case, that a precedent had been set with the McKinnon case, where because he was autistic, they said that they wouldn't send him on the same grounds. I mean, I would imagine that probably most people that are caught as hackers probably fit somewhere on the spectrum. Do you know what I mean? They probably fit certainly somewhere on the scale. You could find components of them, definitely. I mean, because it's almost like a trait of hackers. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of parts to it. It's quite worthwhile to have this precedent set, because pretty much anybody that's ever caught after that ever will almost certainly be able to be shown to be in some way, shape or form autistic, and then you never need to extradite anyone by the same basic grounds. You know what I mean?
Well, that kind of makes sense to me. It's just, just the entire thing seems a little bit off, because they started referring to autism as like a severe illness, and autism isn't an illness. It's kind of more of a trait that people have. It can be a disability, but what I would say is that using terms, people will sometimes refer to being on the autistic spectrum as a learning disability, but not everyone who has autism would be classified as having a learning disability. Like, I certainly am not. It's one of those things that, it can be a very, very wide spectrum, and they kind of went on the kind of stereotypes of autism that, it's kind of like severe and it affects people and makes their lives very, poor and stuff like that. And I can tell you, as an autistic adult, that the way I kind of feel is, I could easily tell you if I was doing something wrong was a crime or not. But, if I was arrested for something, I'm pretty sure I'd do the same as Gary and be like, oh, I didn't know my consequences. Milk it for all you can. It's like, if I met you guys in the pub and then you were said, look, have you got your wallet in my pocket? I would be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm autistic and I didn't realize possessions belong to people. And you'd be like, no, I know you, Luke. You're a reasonable individual. You just pocketed my wallet, you absolute cunt. That's the way it would work.
It's weird to me. It almost seems as if they've made autism some sort of scapegoat in this situation. Indeed. If I didn't know better, I'd say you planned this all along. Look, I would say, yeah, I definitely agree with both of you guys. I think it has been used as an excuse, but I would also say this: if it was either one of us that were in the position he was in, I would do anything and say anything if I thought it was going to get me out of jail. So, you need to kind of hold your hands up and have a bit of respect for him. He got out of it. He got away with it. He did the crime. He didn't do the time. So, good luck to him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just as a caveat to everything that I said, I'm not holding it against him for saying that he done that. I just don't believe that he's I just believe that as an adult, I am looking at it and I'm saying it's absolute bullshit. But I'm not holding it against him for not getting fucking extradited and getting tried under the backside of the fucking Patriot Act in America and spending the next 25 years in Guantanamo. It's not going to have been a nice experience for him. Fuck, even if he wasn't suicidal, it would have been by the end of it. Do you know what I mean? And it was after 9/11, say 2003, 2004, whatever, there was a very real chance that he was going to, go there under the Patriot Act. Do you know what I mean? And he would have just been sent to, Guantanamo or an equivalent thereof, and it'd have been shit for him. So I'd have avoided that like the fucking plague.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite glad that I have a friend who's a prominent, autism expert. So, if I'm ever in trouble for anything, look, I'll be looking to you for a diagnosis.
So look, by the way, at some point or another, you are definitely going to be testifying, probably in America, on the me and Jerry's podcast as a podcast ran by two autistic lads. Like, almost definitely.
So guys, I'm going to throw a wild theory in your direction. Julian Assange has called himself a little autistic at different times. If he was to be given a proven diagnosis, do you think he should be let off from his hacking crimes?
I mean, he's not actually. Is he charged with hacking crimes, or is he charged with like raping some Swedish bird?
I mean, the difficulty here is see if you're able to say you don't fully right. See if you say you don't really fully understand your actions, and you're using autism as the excuse for it. Where do you stop in that chain? Like, if he gets diagnosed as being like, no, he is quite autistic and stuff like that, and he's like, I don't understand the results of my actions, then he just says like, oh, I didn't realise it was rape. Do you know what I mean? Like, where does that chain stop? Does that not become an incredibly dangerous chain in court systems?
Brett Kavanaugh, he'll be autistic next.
Well, exactly. Sorry, well, I was just to agree. If Kavanaugh just did come out and says, "Oh, I'm autistic," and then somebody diagnoses him as autistic in 3 hours, like McKinnon, do you know what I mean? And then he says, "So I didn't realise when I was 17 that I was being a horrible rapey man." Like, does that then become a thing? Does that then become like a get out of jail free card for, like, as I said, a whole shitload of people that in some form or another you can find some actions that could make it seem like they might be on the autistic scale? Like, that becomes very dangerous if you start using it.
And on the other side, I think it's very important to note that there are certain people on the spectrum who would be very potentially vulnerable. And if people started to believe, like, all people with autism, we can't really trust that as a diagnosis, because certain cases, like if Julian Assange potentially got out of prison because of this, or as you said, Brett Kavanaugh, this could like affect people who really need the help, they need the support, that they need people to believe in them, and they need people to kind of treat them as some of their actions may not be, we should treat them in the same way that we would treat people who would be more towards the neurotypical part of the spectrum, Yeah, you could potentially give yourself a bad situation that you have people who have the higher functioning getting away with things, and people with the lower functioning really suffering. So yeah, this is potentially something that could badly affect and could set a really bad precedent.
Okay, well, I think that summarizes pretty much the way we all feel about the McKinnon case, was that he is autistic because he's been diagnosed as that, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have responsibility for his actions. And it does set
and his actions are as a top anti-shagger.
Well,
That's AUNTY, not ANTI. He's not an anti-shagger. Like, he's a shagger of an auntie.
Well, he might be part of the NoFap community or something like that.
He's a proud boy.
Yeah, he thinks not masturbating will give him magical powers. But,
like, to be able to hack and shag people's aunties. Yeah. Those powers are magic.
For Gary, I think they potentially would be. He's a man who could drink 12 cans of Foster's and then still be hacking away like pros. Respect, mad respect. Maybe we could all learn something from Mr. McKinnon. But, okay, guys, so would you like to say anything before we go, or plug your podcast?
Don't know, but I think I might try and make a new t-shirt that says "Shag an Auntie, Hack a Government." That seems like a good...
Well, the way that I kind of made, I don't know if anyone saw it on this Scapegoat YouTube channel, that I made a little video game of Coming from a Disaster.
So fucking good.
I might make a Gary McKinnon RPG where he has to go around and find somebody's auntie, but...
Shag an auntie, buy some weed, drink cans of Foster's.
my energy is low. Must buy 12-pack of Fosters. Your Marlboros are running dangerously low. Will you go to the shop?
Oh, your t-shirt could be, instead of who shot first solo, it could be like do shots first solo. Fucking, it writes itself. Anyway, yeah. So I don't really have anything to plug, but like I says, I might make some t-shirts relevant to this episode.
Yeah, no, just come and check us out on www.notanotherfakenewscast.com, and thank you very much for having us, Luke.
Absolutely, look, it was totally enjoyable, and if you want to do an episode in House of Lords, I will happily come back and do that with you.
Cool. But the one thing I would recommend, if anyone was going to listen to Not Another Fake Newscast, you did, I think it was your 10th episode that you rounded up what different stories you had done last year. And I think that's a very, very approachable, good first episode if you kind of want to get a feel for all the different things Paul and Jerry do. So I would advise, like, if you haven't listened to them, that would be a very good place to start. That's just my own opinion. Do you have like a favorite episode you could recommend, just in case, for people who want to like make a quick dive into your podcast?
I mean, I will do the opposite. I'll say if you're going to start on a podcast or one of your episodes, don't start on the gun control episode, because we go quite deep into it. There's a lot of numbers and stats and figures, and it's about gun control, so it's not a cheery episode. It's very difficult to have a lot of fun when you're talking about gun deaths across the whole United States of America. So I wouldn't start on that episode. I'd certainly start. I would any of the monthly rundown episodes, kind of as Luke says, but following that, any of the monthly rundown episodes are probably the best way to jump in, because it's me and Jerry at our most relaxed. But from a deep dive episode, if you don't know everything about the Cambridge Analytica stuff, maybe like to listen to that episode, or that entire run, the stuff about terrorism in the Middle East, the stuff about HSBC. That whole run I found quite enjoyable. Yourself, Jerry?
I'd say if you're looking for a shorter podcast, then you could jump into one of our interviews. We recently interviewed Orwell-winning novelist Darren McGarvey, who wrote Poverty Safari. I'd say that's like an hour-long podcast, a little shorter than the rest of it, our stuff, and it's a really interesting interview.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also recommend, short-wise, the Byline Festival episode was pretty good.
Yeah, there's a video of us on our YouTube channel as well doing that. So actually the video of us on stage performing at the Byline Festival, talking about Mr. Corbyn and
anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Rob recorded that, didn't he, for you?
He did indeed. Friend of all the shows.
Well, a man generally who gets around and does a lot of fun activities, so shout out to you. Yeah, well, thanks very much for coming on, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and, for my podcast, I need to make more material, but as I put up on the YouTube channel last night, I have a few people guessed from the clues, the next episode is Satanic Panic, but there was so much information that I'm dividing up into different stuff. So the first section we'll do general, and then we'll move on into more towards the music, the videos, and even there's a little bit on D&D and the Satanic Panic, because that gets weird when Gary Gygax gets interested. But yeah, thanks very much for listening, guys, and hope you have a good one. Sorry?
I just wanted to say one more thing. If anybody has came to this episode of the podcast via us and isn't aware of Luke, my personal favourite episode of Scapegoat is the one about the girl in the airport, or the guy who's in the airport. What was the name of the episode, Luke?
It's called Terminal.
For me, it's the Royal Family episode. Have a swatch of that if you get a chance, because it's got lots of good information in it, the type of stuff that I like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much, guys. And yeah, so I hope everyone will listen to me soon, and also listening to Not Another Fake Newscast. Paul did a very good episode on disaster artists on Predator last week, which I'd highly advise you to listen to as well. So now that all that's done, so I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.